Today, I am joined by Jess Weiner. Jess is a cultural expert, author, speaker, and podcast host. Jess has inspired me in countless ways and has been a wonderful female role model that I've looked up to. Jess was a major influence in starting the Inspiration Show. Thank you so much, Jess, for joining me today on the Inspiration Show. It's an honor to speak with you.
It's the best intro, best compliment ever. I'm so happy to be with you, Alison.
You're the best. Do I have your permission to post this episode of the Inspiration Show on social media?
Everywhere. You post it everywhere.
Awesome. Thank you. So if you had to choose 3 key milestones along your very successful journey, which milestones would they be and why?
Oh my gosh, this is such a good question because it made me think about all the things that have happened. You know, we tend to think so much about the things that didn't work out. And this question is so great because it made me remember the things that did. So here's the 3 top thoughts in my head about these milestones. I think the first one was the first time as a playwright when I was in my early 20s. I had just graduated from college. I'd written my first play about body image. And look, my cat is joining us. And I got my first press article written about my work in the Washington Post. And that was such a milestone because I didn't realize the power of press, back then. And I'm also talking about myself pre-internet time. So, this came out in the paper and it was national. And I remember seeing my name in print for the first time. And I just was so overwhelmed and it felt like such a huge accomplishment. And I didn't really plan for it, which made it, I think, even better. So I think seeing my name in print for the first time was a huge milestone. I think a second milestone that actually isn't about success, but is about learning how to pivot is after I built this career that I'm very proud of, where I, have been a public educator, I work with brands, I host podcasts, I get to do all this really fun, creative work. But there came a time in my life a couple of years ago where I was having some real struggles with mental health. And this was before COVID. And the reason why this is a milestone is because I think it's important that successful people who, appear to have a lot of public success, if they're willing to, I think we should share as much authentic story about the moments that didn't go well. So I had a big panic attack that taught me, and I had to get off of an airplane. I thought I was maybe having a heart attack. I mean, I really was having a big panic attack as my life wasn't in a direction. Even though it was successful from the outside, I didn't feel very connected to it from the inside. And that changed everything for me. It changed the direction of the way that I work, the way that I prioritize my mental well-being, the way I think about success differently. And it ended up giving birth to stuff like my podcast, Dominant Stories, or my classes on the Good Life. So I didn't know it then, but that milestone was so important for me to face because it reminded me that no matter what success looks like out there, I have to feel good and healthy inside. And then the third milestone is actually not about my career. It is about my relationship. I got married to my husband almost 10 years ago, and I got married later in my life. And I think why this is important for me as a milestone is because I didn't get married till I was 40. And I don't know who's listening to this show who might think that sounds like I'm really old or it's very far away. But the reason why I say it is because I want young women and young men and all people listening to know that waiting for the right love in your life and really having good boundaries and really taking care of yourself. I used to always just want to have a boyfriend and be in love. And I was very romantic. And when I met my husband, I found this equal partner. And the reason why that's so important is because I live a big life and he supports me in that. And he's my best friend. And that's like a huge milestone for me because even if I stopped working tomorrow, this is the love of my life and we're building a wonderful family together. So for me, these have all been a part of my career, but I am my career, so I can't separate the personal and the professional.
Yeah, of course. And going back to the other milestones that you've mentioned, the milestones that you really get to celebrate are important because you really get to recognize all the hard work that you've put in. But the other milestones that really help you realize and really wake you up and kind of like, hey, smell the coffee. That's really where you can really pivot, like you said, and kind of experience different things and kind of take your past and help it really better your future.
And it's funny because your question was so good. And I kept thinking, oh, I'm going to talk about when I worked at the White House with, the Obama administration. And I'm going to talk about being on TV. And all of those things are super cool. But a milestone for me, just like you said, is like a marker of a moment in your life and not just a fun result, but like a real moment of growth in your life. And I think for me, seeing my name in print gave me the inspiration to keep going. But these other two moments, finding love and then also finding better mental health, that's better than any kind of shiny thing I could talk about.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And so you are the host of my favorite podcast, We're All Gonna Die Anyway. Can you share with the audience a little bit about We're All Gonna Die Anyway?
Sure. I love that it's your favorite podcast. It tickles me so much. I love it too. It's the favorite podcast I've done, truly. And I've done some great ones because We're All Gonna Die Anyway was really this kind of quippy way to talk about how to live a life on purpose. And the irony of this, as you know, Alison, was we put this out right at the beginning of COVID. So I had no idea where the world was heading or the kinds of tragedies we were going to face, but I knew I had had so much loss in my life. I'd lost people that I loved and cared about. And I was hungry to talk about not just the loss and the grief of having somebody die, but the fact that we're all going to die. Nobody gets out of this world alive. We don't know when. And while that could sound depressing for some, I actually found it to be really inspiring. Like, what am I going to do with this one precious life, like the poet Mary Oliver says? So we built this podcast to talk to some of my favorite people. I called in my friends and, extended family that I love and had them share their experiences with living on purpose and facing death or loss. The big things that I don't think we talk about enough, because when we do, it's like we give ourselves permission to enjoy this life a little bit more, to get present to what we're grateful for. And I personally needed to do that podcast, Alison. It was just my own catharsis. And what I found along the way is people like Sarah Bareilles or Tim Federle from High School Musical or Josh Bassett from High School Musical or my friend Monique Coleman from the original High School Musical. We had a big theme going on there. Everybody shared, especially the artists and creators, everybody shared that same kind of passion for wanting to talk authentically about how to live a life on purpose. And so I had so much fun and was probably the most moving set of interviews I've ever done.
Yeah, and I can truly connect with that because when I always found watching We're All Gonna Die Anyway, it really gives you a better insight on life. And I think that title, we're going to get into it in a minute, is so intriguing because you're only given one shot at life, really. So it's really how you can use that one shot to make it better, and you can make it the best it can possibly be.
You know what's so cool though is folks your age and younger and slightly older, like what I loved was that there was a real resonance with that title for people. Like I always think about it because I'm in the middle age of my life. And I always think like, well, that's something my friends and I are talking about now. But I had so many young listeners for that show who I think just like you, like felt like it was more of a calling or a reminder. And I loved that so much. I was more tickled at our young listeners and viewers than anything else. I was so happy that you could be a part of those conversations with us.
And it was truly an honor to listen and to learn. So giving that very interesting title of We're All Gonna Die Anyway, why did you select that to be the name of your podcast?
Well, I used to make this joke all the time with, when I would speak in front of audiences, if somebody made a mistake or if I made a mistake or, I would always just say, well, you know what, it's okay. We're all going to die anyway. Like I just tried to make it a lighter mood of like, at the end of the day, what's the worst thing? We're all going to make mistakes. We're going to love, we're going to lose. Everybody is universal in that way. So I used to say it just kind of as a quippy thing. And then when I faced some real loss in my life, of friends and family, I think it really grounded me in that reality, which is, I don't know how much time I have. I mean, luckily, knock wood, I'm healthy right now as I'm talking to you, and I try to take good care of that health. But as anybody knows who's lost somebody, it can happen at any time. So it created this urgency. And so that title or that phrase, I was like, oh, that sounds like a great title either for a book or a podcast. And then we decided to make it into a podcast. And it really helped us get the guests and get the message of the show out very quickly, right? You're intrigued and you go, oh, I want to listen more. And that's what you want for a podcast.
Because the intro of We're All Gonna Die Anyway is it's a podcast where you talk about life and death and everything in between. So I think getting to touch on that three very different topics, but when you think about it, it all really happens in such a short amount of time because life is so short. So I think getting into that with some different people who've experienced different things, it was just amazing to see and to really take that all in, and how people have learned from others, or how other people have inspired others, or how they've been inspired. I think it was amazing to see that.
Awesome. I'm so glad you loved it. If we do a season 2, you have to come on and talk to me about your life experiences.
That would be the best. Such an honor. So what inspired you to start the podcast?
I think everything we just talked about was a big inspiration, like lived experiences, the idea that it's a hard conversation to have. People don't know how to bring it up. People don't want to talk about death. And I think the more I talk about death, it brings me to life and then everything in between, because what are we most afraid of? That we're not going to exist anymore. And I understand that fear, but I'm more afraid now of living and not existing, like not using my time to enjoy life and to help other people and to learn more about myself. So I think the inspiration really came from a call to action for myself and for others to take our lives a little bit more seriously and not seriously at the same time, like to be able to really say to each other, how do you live a good life that you love on your own terms? That's really what those conversations were about, much more than death. It was what lights you up for living, because the more I can see that in other people, the more I can see it in myself.
Yeah, like how can you leave a mark on this world, and how can you live a good life? And speaking of a good life, besides the podcast, you lead a course and workshops, and you recently produced and created a course called The Good Life. Can you share with us a little bit about The Good Life and the inspiration behind it?
I'd love to. So I'm a big teacher, and I often teach in classrooms. I've taught in high schools and colleges, mostly in colleges, the last 10 years. And during COVID, when I took a sabbatical from teaching college, and I was really missing the connection that I had with students, and I would take them through these series of exercises because I was teaching in the School of Communications. And so I was missing taking students through this exercise of examining your life and deciding what your vision is for it, what your values are, and then how you bring that out into the world. So that missing of the classroom plus the experience I had just had with We're All Going to Die Anyway gave me this idea to kind of call these classes The Good Life, and to start to take apart some of the things that we think are going to make us happy, but maybe they don't always make us happy, like being really successful. I talk to a lot of people, especially young people, who think, if I had more followers on social media, I'd be happy. If I get into this college, I'll be happy. When I get married, I'll be happy, or I have this job. And I wanted to help people kind of think about making a life that you love that isn't dependent on what you do, but on who you're being. So this course is an online course. It's a lot of video content that you can do in like bite-sized moments, like 10 minutes at a time, a lot of creative exercises. You and I have a love of theater, so there's a little bit of like role-playing exercises in there, because I wanted different kinds of learners to have a space to go to explore two key questions. What do I really value in the world? Like, what really makes me happy? And is my definition of success really about that? And so when you ask yourself those questions in this course, I think people, especially young people on their way to crafting their life, it gives them a framework to do what they want to do in life, not what you think your parents want you to do or school wants you to do. And by the way, that's not just for young people, like tons of adults choose their lives based on what other people want. So the courses are really designed to give you some independent thinking, some creative problem solving, and a community to talk about that with. We've got a lovely Facebook community, and we communicate on emails. And so that was meant to help take care of people after the course. And the course is available all the time. It's always available on my website.
Wow, that's amazing. And if someone were to reflect on your life, what elements of your life do you think would be considered living your good life?
I would say my passion for mentorship, Alison, is like a really big part of my good life. I had wonderful female role models growing up. My mom is a very strong leader. My grandma was a great role model for me. She was one of the first New York City principals. I had great women in my life and great role models, but in my career, I did find people to help me along the way, but I wish looking back that I maybe had more mentorship or more sponsorship. So I really love mentoring young people, not just in my field, but anywhere. I think that's why I teach and why I like to teach. But it's also interesting because it's not just a one-way street. Like I'm not just teaching them, I'm learning so much from interacting with people. And that's just a huge part of my life. It's what makes me feel human. It's what makes me feel mentally happy is connecting with people. So I would say that's like my biggest reflection. And it's my biggest value is connection.
And I always found teaching at the root of everything, because the teachers get to pass on their wisdom to students, and students get to really learn from their teachers and get to be the best they can be. And they get to share that, really, the person that they've developed into with their teachers. And the teachers also get to learn from the students and the way that they act. And it's just that the teachers get to have great relationships with students, and students get to have mentors and people that they can look up to and feel safe with.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have some of my favorite relationships. I've known, students since they were like 16 and now they're in their 30s and they have children, and, I get to watch their lives unfold. It's the greatest joy for an educator to see the seeds that were planted and how they grow. And for me, every class I've taught, every student I've engaged with has taught me probably well beyond what I feel like I've taught them. It's really shaped my life. I come from a family of educators, so I also think it's just in my DNA.
Yeah, me too. My grandmother was a teacher, my mom was a teacher, and my aunt's a teacher. And it's just amazing to see all the different lives that they've impacted and how students have changed them to be
Totally.
So you've written 2 books. Could you give us a little bit of a synopsis?
Sure. I've written 2 books that are mostly about body image and eating disorders, because that was a really big part of my childhood. I grew up with pretty low self-confidence. I felt like I was never pretty enough or thin enough. I compared myself a lot. Even back then, I didn't have social media, but I compared myself a lot to who I saw on television and in magazines, not dissimilar to today. I just didn't have as much of it, right? But I had a real hard middle school, high school time with disordered eating and body image. And so my first book is called A Very Hungry Girl. And it talks about the hunger that I had, not really for food at the end of the day, but for living, for being seen, for being heard, for being understood, for expressing myself creatively. I discovered that hunger was a real metaphor for all these things that I wanted to be more respected for or related to, right? And so that first book talks about my recovery from the eating disorder and how I did that, and then how I kind of changed that into a career of helping other people talk about difficult topics like body image or eating disorders. I wrote my first play called Body Loathing, Body Love back in, I must have been like 18 or 19. And I got to take that on tour. And that was the basis of a theater company I built. So the book is both memoir, and you would really love it, because I talk about life on the road performing as a young person, and like the stories that the audience would tell me back after they watched one of our plays. So it's a really interesting story. And I have to tell you, in the first book, Alison, I wrote it in 2003. I write about in 1999, you weren't even alive then, but in 1999, I was at Columbine at the first school shooting that we really heard about in the United States, this devastating massacre. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is so terrible. This could never happen again. And look at where we are now with school violence, right? So I have a lot of stories in there about taking a play to that community and opening up dialogue using the arts. So I think somebody who would probably want to read this is somebody who is interested in performing and body image, conversations, and maybe somebody who knows some of the eating disorder, or you've struggled yourself, because it's a very personal journey to how I learned to fill up on my life and not worry so much about my appearance or food in that way. And that's an oversimplification, but anyway, there's a lot to it. And then the second book is called Life Doesn't Begin 5 Pounds From Now, which is very much like the theme of we're all going to die anyway, which is stop waiting for you to lose weight or to get a haircut or to buy a certain pair of shoes or to look a certain way or to have a certain thing in order to be happy. Like your life doesn't begin at some future point. It's right now. And so that book is also stories from my life on the road speaking, but it has more of like tips and tools and takeaways. And so for, somebody who really likes the practical approach to getting more grounded in your life, I think that's a good book for folks to read.
Yeah, my dad always refers to our brains as toolboxes. And over the years, you develop different tools. And I think one of my greatest tools is reading books like yours, where other people get to talk about their personal experiences, and you have to make mistakes. Otherwise, you don't learn. So I think getting to learn from other people's mistakes and getting to not really compare, but to learn and kind of better from other people's mistakes and to say, hey, they did this and that didn't work for them. Maybe I can try this.
Yes. I think the greatest gift we can give ourselves and each other is being honest about our experiences. I think anybody like you, like me, who has a public platform or creates a public platform, which by the way, we all can do these days with social media, right? I feel like it does a real service just to be honest about the experiences you're having instead of feeling like you have to have it all figured out, especially when you're young, because discovering your life and being curious about your life and being open to making mistakes, the greatest gift you could ever give. I love your dad's analogy of your mind being a toolbox, because I agree. My whole life, I've just added tools and sometimes I have to take them out and replace them and add new ones. But I learn from watching and listening to others. That's why connection's my key value.
Mm-hmm. And you've spread so many amazing messages. There are all of the books you've written and all of the amazing things you've been a part of. You've done 2 TED Talks, one titled Permission to Be a Mess and the other titled The Confidence Myth. Can you share with us some inspirational bits or highlights from your TED Talks?
Yeah. So the first one about the confidence myth was really kind of a lot of what we're talking about, which is, we think confidence is a destination. Like, oh, I'm going to work on my confidence and then I'm going to get there and then I'm going to be confident forever. And I tell the audience in this talk, confidence is not the destination. It's the journey. It's getting knocked down and getting back up. That's necessary to build confidence. It's like what you said, it's not getting it right and learning from that mistake that builds confidence. So the confidence myth is kind of breaking down what we think confidence really is and really talking about it being a journey. And then it's funny because the permission to be a mess is probably like the right pickup from the first TED Talk, because now that I've given myself permission to be on a journey, I didn't realize how messy that journey was going to feel, So the second TED Talk is all about battling perfectionism. And maybe there are some listeners out there that can really relate, feeling like I have to do everything perfectly. I got to get perfect grades. I have to look perfect. It's such a heavy burden to carry. And so I actually delivered my second TED Talk at a high school and at a technical high school where we have a lot of high performing kids. And I wanted to bring that message to them in particular, because I think that's a big thing I've seen my students struggle with. And I don't know if you can relate to this as well, but there's so much pressure between social media and school and friends and sports and activities and college and parents. The pressure just seems to get really, really intense. And I don't see young people loving their life. I see them really stressed out from their life.
Mm-hmm. And I just entered grade 8. And the first thing that my teacher said was, I love you all, but if you're a perfectionist, I'm going to knock that right out of you this year. Because there's no such thing as being perfect. You can try and try and try so hard, but there's no such thing as being perfect. And that's why I never say practice makes perfect. I always say practice makes better.
Oh, I love that. Yes, that's right. Practice.
You have to work hard to become better. And even though you can work so hard, there's no such thing as being perfect. And I know we always think I have to be perfect. I need to be perfect at this. I need to be perfect at that. But you have to work hard to be good. And as long as you love it and you're having fun, it's perfect.
That's right. How you feel about it really matters a lot, not what the result is or what people think about it, but how'd you feel and what'd you learn along the way? That's why the tagline for me with Dominant Stories was always learning, always growing, just to remind us that nobody is not learning. That's probably not a good grammatical sentence, but everybody's learning, everybody's growing, no matter where they're at in their life.
Yeah. And we're going to get into dominant stories right now. So you recently launched a series with Shonda Rhimes and iHeartRadio called Dominant Stories. Can you share with us what a dominant story is and one of your personal dominant stories?
Yeah. So a dominant story is a story that you tell yourself about yourself. So simply put, think about kind of any negative inner dialogue you have, right? Like for me, I just shared one with you when I was talking about being a kid and struggling with my body image. So my dominant story would be like, you're not pretty enough, you're not good enough, you're not thin enough, you're not smart enough. Like I would have this really negative voice running almost 24/7 as a kid. And those stories come from everywhere. Sometimes they come from our families. Listen, a lot of families, our parents have dominant stories they're not aware of, and we pick them up. They come from culture. We have a lot of that out in culture. Do this, lose 10 pounds in 10 minutes. And, all these sorts of like pressures that tell you you're not okay the way you are. So dominant stories can come from a lot of places. But what I want us to focus on are the understanding that we all have them, trying to listen to what yours are, and then figuring out a way to challenge those and change those and ultimately rewrite those to be more positive and more supportive. And so for me, like when I get into, and I still have dominant stories. So when I get scared or overwhelmed and my story wants to come up and say, oh, see, you're not good enough to do that project. The way that I change that story is I talk to it. And I say, okay, I hear you. Like I would a person. I hear you. And I'm going to be a little bit more loving to myself because I feel sad right now, or I feel scared right now. And that's real for me. So I'm not going to beat myself up. Okay. Like I almost like have this rationalizing conversation with it. And it's funny how much the dominant story gets quieter and quieter and quieter. Because sometimes dominant stories are there, Alison, just to make you pay more attention to what you're really feeling.
And that just gave me another insight, because I always think of having our voice that we used to speak, but we also have our inside voice, which kind of talks to us inside our head and puts negativity in our head. But now I just realized we have a dominant story voice.
Yeah.
That brings us down, and it's our job to really pull us up.
Yeah. And to listen to it, because it's like you and I were saying, it's like you can learn from it. If that dominant story, let's say, comes up every time you try something new, like you're trying out for a play or a math squad or a cheerleading event or whatever, and you notice that every time you're going to take a risk, that dominant story is really loud. Instead of getting down about it, be like, oh, this voice really pops up when I'm scared. How can I help myself in these moments so I don't have to beat myself up? Like, I think dominant stories are great clues to figure out a pattern in our life that might be hurting us that then we can help ourselves get out of.
Yeah, definitely. And I just think that when you can work so hard to help yourself take out that negativity, you can just become a lot more positive, and you can bring so much more positivity into your life. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so inspired by you, is because you always find a way to share our positivity, and you have accomplished so many things and inspired so many people, including myself, throughout your journey. And some of the reasons you inspire me is the way you always find positivity to spread, and how you share your positivity with the world, and how you bring out the honesty in people when you interview them. Do you have someone who inspires you?
Oh, yeah. Well, let me tell you something. And I'm not just saying this. People like you inspire me, because I'm trying to think about what it would feel like for me to be back in grade 8 and taking on the conversations that I see you take on this show, and to know that I'm any small part of your inspiration is also inspiring for me. And I mean that genuinely. So thank you. And that's why I was so excited to do this show with you and to support you as you've been supporting me. And I would say, I'll go back to my husband, Felipe, who's also my best friend and life partner. And he inspires me because he's overcome a lot in his life. He speaks 2 languages. He works with his hands and builds beautiful furniture. And I look at, and he went to college when he was much later in life. When he was like 36, he went to college. So he didn't have a traditional education path. And he inspires me because no matter his education, he's been a lifelong learner. He reads books and watches YouTube videos like no one's business, and not just like silly cat videos. Like my husband will want to learn how to build a certain kind of table, and we'll sit and watch YouTube videos. And then literally a week later, we have a beautiful new table that he's like taught himself to make. So he inspires me because he hasn't let any of these obstacles stop him, and he loves learning. And so that reminds me again, like the whole point of being on this great and crazy planet at times is just to learn as much as you can about yourself and other people.
Yeah, and like you said, how your husband always overcomes those obstacles. I like to think of life sometimes when it gets rough as an obstacle course, that obstacles just keep coming and just keep coming. And when you do an obstacle course, I normally take a breath or I take some water, and
Yep.
you think of it as that's the highlight. Like you overcome an obstacle and then you have a good time. And obstacles just keep coming.
Yeah.
And all you
Well,
gotta do is overcome them.
that's a very good thing to know at a young age, because you're never going to get to a space where they're not coming. That's the thing. I think many people think like, oh, one day this will all stop. No, this is life. Like
Yeah.
life's going to throw you curveballs. You're going to feel disappointed. You're going to get your feelings hurt. The best thing is to figure out, just like you said, like, how do you learn from it? Take your water break, talk to your friends, take a nap, do what you need to do to prepare, because this is just what it's like to be human.
Yeah. Jess, you are extraordinary and such an inspiration, and it was such an honor to speak with you. I greatly appreciate you making the time to join me on the Inspiration Show, and thank you so much for being one of my biggest inspirations.
Well, I'm smiling from the inside out. I'm so happy to be with you.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.